Passage today, and I'm going to have us do some group discussion around that. People that know and have heard me speak in the past know that I'm kind of just a Bible study leader at heart, and I believe that when Jesus comes to live inside us, he is speaking to us and speaking through us. And the longer that we walk with Jesus, the more that we recognize his voice, and the more that we hear that voice, it's meant for us and it's meant for each other. And so I'm going to have some time where I speak, but I'm going to have some time where I send you guys into groups, and then I'm going to have you speak and hear what you have to say and what you think about the passage that we're going to look at today. And of course, the passage we're going to look at today is a traditional Palm Sunday passage. And maybe for those of you who grew up in certain kinds of churches like I did, Palm Sunday was not just about this passage. You might even have literal palm branches that got passed out at the door as a reminder of what the Sunday was. Well, as I was looking at the passage for this Sunday, it comes from Luke, and it's the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Jesus riding in on the donkey, the traditional passage that's often preached on Palm Sunday. I noticed that in Luke, actually, there are no palm branches. The Gospel of Luke tells the story without the palm branches. So somehow for Palm Sunday, we picked the one passage with no palm branches. We're going to look at it anyway, but I just thought that was fun. It's just a little baby Bible trivia for you, from a Bible nerd. It's just, Gospel of Luke, Palm Sunday, no palm branches. We'll see that in a second. Before I get into the passage, though, I just wanted to tell a brief story that I think illustrates what's going on in this particular passage. There's a certain kind of atmosphere that's happening in this passage, a certain kind of excitement that is building up around Jesus and what Jesus is doing. And so to help illustrate that, I was reminded of something that actually happened to Lauda a while back. Before Lauda was in her current job, she used to be a social worker working in the area of kind of medical care. And back in probably the winter, I think, of 2007, Lauda and a few of her coworkers were invited to a big conference on healthcare in Washington, D.C. Now, at this conference, I'm sure there were all the usual kinds of seminars and boring presentations and vendors and all that stuff. But what Lauda and her coworkers, and I imagine a lot of other attendees, were really excited about were the two main speakers, the two keynote speakers. And one of the keynote speakers was the senator from Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy, who'd been a senator for a long time, was a very powerful politician, and of course was a relative to the late President John F. Kennedy. And so that was a pretty big deal. But even more exciting, I think, for Lauda, for her coworkers, and for everybody attending, was the other keynote speaker. Because the other keynote speaker was a rookie senator from the state of Illinois named Barack Obama. And so everybody was very excited. I wasn't there, I just heard about it, and I'm jealous of her to this day about it. But I heard from her, there was a palpable, you could just tell there was an excitement in the room. For the first talk with Ted Kennedy, Lauda and her coworkers were able to get near the front of the room, get the good seats. But for Barack Obama, they were all the way in the back. In fact, she took a picture of it. I should have brought it today. Took a picture of it. And Barack Obama's about this big, and you probably can't tell it's Barack Obama. It's just like, yeah, that guy is African-American, but otherwise I can't tell who that is. But it's because they were way in the back of the room, because that's how much excitement there was for the fact that he was speaking. Now, this is before he had announced that he was going to run for president in a short amount of time. But already there was a certain amount of excitement and hype building around him. He had been giving speeches at certain places. He had been connecting with certain people. He had been doing the things that you do if you are planning to run for president. And so even amongst people who did not follow politics or the news very closely, you knew that something was happening around this guy. And you wanted to be a part of it. And I imagine everybody there at that particular keynote speech was there partly to hear what he had to say, and partly just to say, I was there as the ball got rolling on that man's political career. And of course, not long after that, he announces that he is running for president. And the rest is history. I say all that because that kind of enthusiasm, that kind of excitement, that kind of anticipation was starting to build around Jesus at the time of the passage that we're about to look at. He was doing things that people saw and interpreted as meaning that something big was about to happen. He was traveling on his way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, a very big deal celebration in Jewish culture. But people had a feeling that this time it was more than just a celebration. Jesus was on the road, and Jesus was about to do something. Now, as we know from later stories, we know that they didn't have exactly the right idea about what he was going to do. In fact, none of his followers or his disciples or his closest friends really had any idea of what was coming. But they did know that something was coming. The excitement was building. The anticipation was rising. Jesus was on the road to Jerusalem, and Jesus was about to do something. So let's take a look at the passage. Clicker friend, if you could click. And this is the beginning of our passage. We're not going to look, it's 28 to 44 here. We're not going to look at all of that. In fact, we're probably just going to focus on the first 10 verses or so. But let me read it for us, this first part. This is Luke 19, starting in verse 28. It says, after telling this story, Jesus went on toward Jerusalem, walking ahead of his disciples. As he came to the towns of Bethphage and Bethany on the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 disciples ahead. Go into that village over there, he told them. As you enter it, you will see a young donkey tied there that no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks, why are you untying that colt? Just say, the Lord needs it. So they went and they found the colt just as Jesus had said. And sure enough, as they were untying it, the owners asked them, why are you untying that colt? And the disciples simply replied, the Lord needs it. So they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their garments over it for him to ride on. I just pause briefly here. We are not going to spend a lot of time on the donkey story, but I will say that, again, this is part of sort of the hype. This is a part of the rising expectation. You can imagine if you were the 2 disciples, right, and Jesus sent you on this little mini mission to get his ride, and what that must have been like, right? So the disciples, these 2 disciples, right, are probably like, okay, well, because Jesus said it, I'm going to do it, but, I mean, we'll see. We'll see if this donkey is where it's at and if someone's just going to let us ride off with it, okay? So you can imagine they're kind of going back and forth, having this conversation. Are you going to talk to the owner? You want me to talk to the owner? I think you should talk to the owner. Kind of more of a donkey owner guy. Okay, you talk to the owner. They're, having that conversation. They get there, and sure enough, there's a donkey. Like, well, that's pretty amazing. Jesus knew what he was talking about. Well, let's see what happens next. They untie the donkey, and sure enough, the owner says, understandably, what are you doing with my donkey? And then the disciples are like, well, we got our script. We know the line to give, and they give the line, the Lord needs it. And apparently the owners of the donkey were just like, that's enough for me. Call it a rental. Bring it back when you're done. I don't know. It was just like theirs to go, right? So they took the donkey. You imagine on the way back, they're like, it worked just exactly like Jesus said. That's amazing. We've got his donkey. And then they come back, they bring the donkey. You can imagine amongst the larger group of disciples, the word starts to get out. Did you hear what happened with Jeff and Jose about that donkey? It went exactly like Jesus said. He's got his, something must be happening. This is not just a normal trip into Jerusalem. And so again, this excitement is happening. You can imagine amongst the followers, right? Something is happening. We don't usually ride on someone else's donkey into Jerusalem with the Passover. This is different. This time is different, right? So the anticipation is building. Let's look at the next slide. So as he rode along, the crowd spread out their garments on the road ahead of him. When he reached the place where the road started, down the Mount of Olives, all his followers began to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they had seen. Blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in highest heaven. And I'll pause there, and this is where I'm going to have us talk a little bit in groups. So first, what I want you to do is just kind of circle up with the folks around you. Maybe 4 or 5 folks, your row. If you just have half a row, join someone else's row. But circle up, get in some groups, and I'm going to have a question for us to talk about here in a second. So don't be shy. Meet someone new. Say hello. Circle up into some groups, and I have a question for you. All right, everybody got some friends, new friends, old friends. All right, so here's the question. Here's the thing I want us to discuss. So it says in our passage, it says all his followers, as Jesus is riding along on his donkey, it says all his followers begin to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they had seen. So let's talk for a minute. What have the disciples seen up to this moment? Thinking what we know about the passages that we have looked at in the past, whether in Bible study or here on Sunday, what have exactly the disciples seen of Jesus throughout the time of his ministry? And how would you describe their relationship to Jesus at this point? What have they seen of Jesus? And how would you describe their relationship with Jesus at this point, based on what we can see from this passage? So talk about that for a few minutes. I'll bring us back together to hear what you talked about. All right, let me bring us back together. You can feel free to stay in your groups. Stay in your groups. I'm going to bring us back together. You can stay in your groups because I'm going to send you back into discussion anyway, so you can stay in the groups. It's fine. Bring us back together. So I'd love to hear what you all talked about. First question, what have the disciples, it says, the disciples are praising God for what they have seen. What have the disciples seen of Jesus up to this point? What have the disciples seen? What did you guys talk about? There's like motions of like half hand raises. Go Tira and then Angelica. Okay, Tira and then Gracie. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you remember that story, right? Jesus stops the storm, right? The storm that they were in, the storm they thought was going to kill them. Jesus stops the storm. He exerts authority over creation itself. Yeah, absolutely. Was it Gracie? Go ahead, Gracie. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so they saw so many healings, right? The blind can see, the lame can walk, paralyzed people are getting up and carrying their mat and just walking out, right? People being healed. Jesus exerting his authority over people's bodies, being able to repair what everybody thought was unrepairable, unfixable, hopeless. Other folks, what have they seen? Yeah, easy. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I love that, Easy. I love that. Yeah, it's not just the acts of power, right? It's not just the miracles, as important as those were, but they saw someone who drew close to them, who was in relationship to them, who felt what they felt, who was going through what they went through, who understood what it was like to be a human, who understood what it was like to be a person. Not someone distant and far off, but someone close. Someone who knew them and who allowed them to know him, right? Yeah. Any other thoughts about what the disciples have seen of Jesus up to this point? You were here? Yes. Peter. Okay. Yeah, that's a wild story, right? Yeah, so Peter walks on water, right? They see that Jesus not only has authority over all the things that we have talked about, but he begins to give that authority away to his followers, right? So we have Peter walking on water. He sends out his followers to do some of the same healings, the same miracles that he did, right? And so they have experience not just of seeing the power of God at work, but they have the experience of seeing the power of God working through them, right? And that's got to be amazing as well. Random fishermen, tax collectors, just people with no background, no credentials, no reason why they should be the one, and yet Jesus chose them for God to work through in powerful ways. Yeah. Let's talk for a second about how the disciples in this moment, as Jesus is coming in on the donkey, as they're throwing their garments down on the road, how are they feeling about Jesus? How would you describe their relationship to Jesus at that moment? Yeah, brother. Okay. Yeah, so that's right. There's a story that happens, you're exactly right, not too long after this episode, right, where Peter, just in a it's not going to happen today kind of mode, just takes a sword and cuts a dude's ear off because he's like, Jesus ain't getting arrested on my watch. And I think that you're exactly right. There is a sense of loyalty, right? It's a strong connection, a strong sense of loyalty to Jesus. I have seen what you have done, not just for others. I have seen what you have done for me, and it has made me loyal to you, at least up until this point, right? Yeah. Other thoughts? How do the disciples feel about Jesus in this moment? Yes, Tira. Yeah. We got one today. Right. Yeah. 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 So there's this loyalty, and again, there's that sense of expectation. Jesus, you are about to do something, and we want to be there with you when it happens, right? I got to imagine this picture of Jesus walking through this crowd. When I think about this crowd, and this is through my imagination, it's not in the text, but I imagine that some of the folks in that crowd would have been familiar faces. People that would have met Jesus along the road, along his journey and through his ministry. I imagine there was the leper in that crowd. I imagine that leper was praising Jesus because Jesus was the one. He probably said, Jesus, praise you because you're the only one that would draw close to me. You're the only one that would touch me. You're the only one that could have healed me. I imagine the bleeding woman might have been in that crowd. The woman with the flow of blood went to doctors, got broke because she couldn't afford anymore. Doctors who couldn't help her anymore. The shame and the embarrassment. He says, praise Jesus because you rescued me from my shame, from my embarrassment, because you healed something that no one else could heal. I got to imagine that Jairus, and this, is just because I'm a dad and I'm about to get choked up about it. But I imagine Jairus, right? Jairus, if you remember, is the one whose daughter was on the verge of death, who dies, and Jesus comes and brings her back to life. I imagine Jairus there too. I imagine, and it's probably not even culturally appropriate, but I still imagine Jairus with the daughter on his shoulders, praising Jesus, saying, he brought my daughter back from the edge of death. My daughter is alive because of Jesus. And so if I'm feeling emotional about it, you can imagine what the disciples are feeling. You can imagine what some of his followers are feeling. You can imagine what those who were touched most closely are feeling. People whose lives were transformed and healed and changed, giving glory to God because of what Jesus did in their life. Because they saw something of Jesus and they gave glory to him. As I was thinking about this, I was reminded, in fact, Ralph, who's not here today, but he reminded me of this the other day in small group. Almost exactly 2 years to the day of today, I found out that I was getting laid off from my job. My job was being eliminated, and I was being laid off. And that happened literally 2 days before LA shut down for COVID. So not only was I getting laid off from my job, I was getting laid off from my job at a moment when the economy was essentially frozen because of COVID. Needless to say, it was a little bit uncomfortable, and I was a little concerned about what the future might hold. But I began to apply for jobs, and I began to go around to the church and just asking people for prayer. And friends, I hustled Hope Community Church for prayer like I have never done before. I was at the Wednesday lunch prayer time asking for prayer. I was texting elders asking for prayer. I was talking to my Bible. I was leading the Zoom Bible study at that time. I was asking them for prayer. Loudest coworkers were praying for me. I had as many people praying for me as I possibly could. And I was sending out job applications, one after the other. Must have sent out 50 job applications and didn't hear anything back. Now, I'm not talking about I didn't get the job. I'm talking about not only did I not get interviewed, I didn't get a call back. I didn't even get a robot to call me back. I got those emails, just like I sent my application out, I got the emails back, well, thank you for applying, we've gone with someone else. Almost 50 times reading those emails over 3 months of applying for jobs. But I've got people praying for me, and every day, Thursday, Bible study, I was like, people, if you could just pray for me, right? Moments of anxiety, but I trust that God is there, and I'm seeing him work, because at every point where we needed provision, especially financially, that provision was there. Whether it was through unemployment, whether it was through severance from my former employer, whether it was through anything else, the money was there when we needed it. And then 3 months after my job ended, at the point where it was going to start to get financially tight, I got hired in the job that I have today. And it was an answer to prayer. And I remember I went back to the Wednesday lunchtime prayer. I said, your prayers have been answered. I got a job. I texted the elders. I said, your prayers have been answered. I got a job. Louder shared it with her coworkers. Your prayers have been answered. Chris has got a job. And I shared it with everybody. And I was like the disciples in this story. I was like, praise Jesus, because I have seen you work in my life. I saw you from beginning to end. You were present there. I saw the miracle. I know you're with me. I know you love me. I know you love my family. Jesus, you are king over my life when I needed it the most. And so we have that, and it's an appropriate response. It's an appropriate response for the disciples. It's an appropriate response for us to remember and to see the things that God is doing in our lives and to respond to that with our praises. Now, there's another audience here as Jesus rides into Jerusalem on the donkey. There's another audience here that is not so loud as the disciples. In fact, there's another audience here. There's a group of people that, in addition to being quiet, not praising God, they ask Jesus to silence everyone else as well. Verse 39, but some of the Pharisees among the crowd said, "Teacher, rebuke your followers for saying things like that." He replied, if they kept quiet, the stones along the road would burst into cheers. So there's this other group. There's the silent group. There's the praise group. There's the group that has seen Jesus work and is say, praise God, Jesus, you are king. And there's another group. There's the silent group. It's the Pharisees. We've talked about the Pharisees in our Bible studies and on Sunday, but just to put it shortly, these are the religious influencers of their day. We have cultural influencers in our own day. There are people that if they do a thing on Instagram, or if they do a thing on TikTok, or if they do a thing on a thing that I haven't heard of yet, then 5 minutes later, everybody else will be doing that thing. There are influencers. That's our pop culture, but they didn't have that. They didn't have that in Jesus' day. They didn't have really popular culture in that day. The main culture in Jesus' day was religious culture, and so the Pharisees were the ones that most influenced that religious culture. If you wanted to know what it looked like to do right by God, if you wanted to know what it looked like to follow God with everything you had, you looked to the Pharisees. What were the Pharisees doing? And in this moment, the Pharisees are seeing Jesus ride into Jerusalem on his donkey, and they're saying, and they're hearing everything the disciples are saying. They're saying, Jesus, silence the disciples. They're not praising, and the disciples shouldn't be praising either. So I want us to talk for a minute about this other audience, about the silent audience of the Pharisees. What do you think is going on for the Pharisees in this moment? Why don't they want people to praise God? Why are they not praising God? Because what stands out to me in this moment is that the Pharisees have seen many of the same miracles that the disciples have. If you recall some of those stories, some of them happened right in front of the Pharisees. And yet, even though they have seen the miracles of Jesus, or at least a lot of the miracles of Jesus, they are not praising Jesus in this moment. They are not praising God for what Jesus has done, like the disciples are. They've seen the miracles, and yet they are silent. So let's talk about that. What do you think is going on in your groups? What do you think is going on for the Pharisees in this moment? And why do you think they're silent? How do they feel about Jesus in this moment? So talk about that for a few minutes. I'll bring us back together and we'll share. All right, let me bring us back together. And I'd love to hear what you've been talking about. What do you see is going on with the Pharisees? Seeing many of the same miracles, seeing Jesus do many of the same things, and yet they are silent as other people praise. Yeah, brother, go Dodgers. Yes. They are just haters. And maybe some jealousy in there, right? Maybe some sense of, hey, why is it happening to others and it's not happening to me? Why is God working through them and he's not working through me? And instead of wondering, maybe there's something going on with me, the natural assumption becomes, maybe there's something going on with them. Maybe it's not my problem, maybe it's Jesus' problem. Okay, that's good. I love that. Yeah, Mary, go ahead. Yeah. Mm. Okay. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. 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 I like that. It's a good line there at the end, right? We're going to talk about that in a second. But yeah, there's this sense of like, whether because of their religiosity, whether it's the focus on doing or obeying the rules rather than being sensitive to what God is at work in, or if it's again that sense of jealousy, or it just is repetition, whatever it might be, it does seem, yeah, they're missing something. Yeah, go ahead, Unique. Mm. Okay. Yeah. 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 And maybe to even extend that further, right, to say like, yeah, they said that we're the ones whom God works through, and if we're the ones whom God works through, maybe it can't be you, right? That sense of like, yeah, nice, flashy tricks, cute thing you did with a storm, but that's not how God works. We know how God works. God works through us. God works through what we do. God's not working through what you do. Yeah, brother. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 So there's this sense again that, hey, we're the ones that influence how this stuff is done. We're the center of that. And they miss, again, what else is going on there. They easily dismiss, right? Because it's like, hey, it was about us. It still is about us. It can't possibly be about what you're doing. And the rules, so going back, right? Also this emphasis on rules, right? The sense of like, we follow the rules and that is how it is done. And Jesus, in their minds at least, did not follow the rules. And so God couldn't possibly be in someone that wasn't following at least those rules, right? Any other thoughts? Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's true. They recognize they don't have any influence over the crowd and what he's doing, so it's sort of their last gasp chance. Hey, at least maybe you could tell them to be quiet because what they're saying is not right, right? Yeah. Anything else? Yes. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I like that, Gabby. Yeah, there's a way in which if you ignore, so we talked about how the disciples felt, right? There was this sense of loyalty, a sense of like, yeah, Jesus, we are with you. You have done something in our lives, and we want our life to be with you. We want to follow you because what you have done for us. And I think you're right. I think probably the Pharisees recognize like that's what's at stake. If we acknowledge your kingship, that means we have to give something up in exchange for our relationship with you. The disciples were willing to make that exchange, and the Pharisees were not. Yeah. Well, just to summarize and add a little bit to what we've already talked about, I think when it comes to the Pharisees and why they don't praise Jesus, even though they've seen some of the same miracles as the disciples, I think they're silent because they, like we have been saying, they're stuck. And I think part of where they are stuck is that they have witnessed Jesus. They have witnessed moments where he has interacted with the wrong people. When he did the wrong things at the wrong times. When he visited the wrong houses and ate the wrong dinners at the wrong parties. Remember, just for those that know, at the beginning of this same chapter, Jesus has just had dinner with Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is the chief tax collector. So Zacchaeus has been the worst of the worst. And not only does Jesus have dinner with the worst of the worst, but he comes away and says, this man, Zacchaeus, is now good with God. And I think for the Pharisees, that was just too much. Because in their minds, there was just one way, or there was just no way that God could be there. There was no way that God could possibly be in that situation. There's no way that God could possibly be at work in those moments. Jesus couldn't be king. He couldn't be Lord because there's no way that God's Messiah would be in those places doing those things. And so they blind themselves to the miracles. They convince themselves that what they have seen cannot possibly be God because God wouldn't be found in those particular places. He could not be at work in those particular situations. And if I'm honest, I think I have a bit of both groups in my heart too. I think I have both a bit of the disciples and a bit of the Pharisees in my heart too. Because as I just shared, there are moments where I see God work in my life and it is so clear to me. God, that was you. As I just shared, God, that was you getting me that job. That was you providing for my family. That was you in that moment from beginning to end. Jesus, you are king of my life and you deserve my allegiance. You deserve my loyalty. Praise you for being king over my life. But I think there are moments where certainly I can be like the Pharisees, where I can find myself falling into silence. And we are probably silent, not for the reasons that the Pharisees were silent, not for the power reasons or even who he associated with, but I think we can be silent in the midst of our suffering. I think it's easy for us to fall silent in the midst of the challenges of our life. We can fall silent in the midst of pain and hurt. We can fall silent in those moments in life where we are most desperate, where we're most in need. Moments in life where we're the most hopeless, the most discouraged. Moments where we don't know where God is. I think we can fall silent in those places of suffering. And just like the Pharisees, suddenly the miracles seem far away and unimportant. And the only thing is what's happening now, the hurt and the suffering, and we maybe even only to ourselves admit, Jesus, can you possibly be king in this moment? If you are king, would I really be hurting this much? If you are king, would life really be this hard? If you are king, if you're really king, would things be turning out the way they're turning out in my life right now? We become silent in the pain. We become silent in the suffering, and the miracles quickly get forgotten. At a moment like this in my own life, and this was back in after my sophomore year in college. Sophomore year of college comes to an end, and at the time I was dating a woman we'd been dating for 3 years. I'd met her in high school. And you have to know the context for this story. It wasn't loud, it was someone else, just so you know, so it's clear. I had met her in high school. We've been dating for 3 years. And coming into the summer after my sophomore year, I had decided not to go on I'd been offered the opportunity to go on a summer missions project with friends from college, a 6-week project over the summer. But I had decided not to do that because I wanted to spend time with my girlfriend that summer. We went to different schools at the time. We hadn't seen that much of each other during the year. And so this summer was going to be the summer where we finally got some time together. We finally got a chance to reconnect. So my school year ends, and right at the beginning of the summer, my girlfriend and I get together. We were going to a show. Our friends were in a band at the time, and they were playing at this place. And so we're going to go to this show together. And so we met up at the place where this show was happening. And I go to the show, I meet her there, and we listen to our friends play in a band. And I could tell from the beginning that something was like a little bit off. There was a little chill in the air, if you know what I mean. But at the time, some people know where this is going already. At the time, I didn't think that much of it. Our relationship at that point had been pretty up and down. And I just thought, you know what, maybe something's going on. We'll talk about it later. So the show ends, and we go outside, and she pulls me aside. She said, we need to talk. And she pulls me aside, and before I know it, this conversation, she's telling me that the relationship is over, that she's breaking up with me. And the rest of it is kind of a blur. I know I said something, I don't remember what it was. All I remember is all of a sudden I'm in my car and I'm driving home. And all the plans I had for the summer, all this idea of spending the summer reconnecting and rekindling this romance were done. And I was kind of numb. I was kind of shell-shocked. I didn't know what to feel. Was I glad? Was I relieved? Was I sad? I didn't know what to feel in the moment. A couple days go by, maybe a week goes by. All of a sudden, all the feelings start to show. In fact, all the feelings kind of show up all at once and kind of avalanche over my mind and over my heart. And suddenly I feel sort of lost and confused, and I'm not sure what to do. At the time, I had for that summer a summer job for the afternoons and evenings. And because most of my friends were either at this summer mission or had gone home for the summer, I didn't have much else to do other than this job. And so most mornings, I was living with my parents at the time, most mornings I would get up, I'd walk down to a park that was down the street from my parents' house, I'd find a bench, and I would just sit there and stare off into the distance, not knowing what to think, trying not to think sometimes, not knowing what to feel, trying not to feel sometimes. And then sometimes I would cry. And then sometimes I'd bring my journal, but this was not your like Christian glory hallelujah journaling. This kind of journaling was angry. It was hurt. It was frustration. It was discouragement. It was painful. And of course, in the midst of this, as often happens with these kinds of relationships, my girlfriend actually reached out again and asked to get back together 2 times. We didn't, but it felt like we had to go through the breakup process 2 more times. So I didn't break up 1 time that summer, I broke up 3 times that summer. So in the midst of the drama of all that I was feeling, of all that I was going through, in the midst of the drama, having my girlfriend reach out to me, in the midst of all that, I couldn't get out of my head that my friends were off at this summer mission project, having fun, bonding, having amazing experiences. And I should have been there. I should have been there. If I had been there, I would have missed out on this. I wouldn't be going through what I was going through in that moment. And in thinking that, all I could think about was, God, why is this happening? Why are you doing this? This cannot be a part of your plan. This cannot be a part of how it was supposed to go. It hurts too much. And I think at that point, I had never felt more alone in my life than I did during that summer. But of course, Jesus is and was then still king. He was still king of my life. He was still king of my life even though I couldn't thank him for what I was going through. He was still king of my life even though I couldn't bless him for what I was experiencing. He was king of my life when I could see the miracles, and he was king of my life when I couldn't. And I think that's what Jesus gets at when he's talking about the rocks. He's telling the Pharisees, look, I am king when people see the miracles and acknowledge them, and I am king when they do not. I am king on the donkey to the road to the Jerusalem, and I am king on the road to the cross. I am king in this moment, and I am king in the tomb. I am king on Good Friday, and I am king on Easter Sunday. He was king of my life when I could feel it, and he was king of my life when I could not. He was king of my life when I could bless him, and he was king of my life when I could not. And because that was the case, because that was true, even in the midst of my pain, even in the midst of the questions I had, even in the midst of my doubts about what God was doing in my life, he was there. He was loving me. He was with me in that process. And slowly, in the midst of all the emotions, in the midst of the drama even, in the midst of the journaling, in the midst of staring off and wondering what the heck was going on, Jesus was starting to do something in my heart. See, Jesus was starting to show me things about my relationship with my now ex-girlfriend. He was starting to reveal to me the ways in which that relationship was unhealthy and dysfunctional. He was starting to show me ways in which my ex-girlfriend had gotten her value out of me and how I had gotten my value out of being needed. And that we had started to get our value out of each other instead of getting our value from Jesus, the one who gives us our value, the one who lets us know beyond a shadow of a doubt that we're loved. And so Jesus started to do something even when I wasn't aware of it. Jesus started to heal even when I wasn't aware of it. And so that painful process turned out to be a healing process. That time away from friends ended up being a time where it gave Jesus the space to draw close to me. And that emotional and spiritual wilderness ended up being a preparation for what was to come. Because after that summer, two important things happened in my life. The first thing that happened is that when I got back to campus, to my college campus, I started to lead a weekly Bible study in my dorm for my fellow college students, something I'd never done before. And I was able to do that because during the summer, as Jesus started to get the junk out of my heart, and as he started to draw close to me, and as he got himself in the right place in my heart, it allowed me to lead others to him as well. The other thing that happened after that summer, the end of my junior year, I started dating Laura. Speaking of miracles. I started dating Laura. And unlike what had happened before, this was different. In fact, our relationship at that time and our relationship in the 20 years since we started dating is different. And it's different because Jesus had done something in my heart that summer. Because Jesus has helped me understand where my value and my worth comes from, that it doesn't come from a relationship, it doesn't come from another person, but it comes from him. Because he helped me understand that, I was able to take that into my relationship, and I didn't put that burden on Laura, because that was Jesus' responsibility. And she didn't put it on me because she knew that was Jesus' responsibility. And it's not been a perfect relationship, and those that have come to the Thursday Bible study have heard some of the sharing about that. It's not been perfect, but even in its worst moments, it has been better than what I had before. Because even in its worst moments, we have understood that it's Jesus who gets us through and not each other. And so now I can say, praise Jesus the King for when I can see the miracles. Praise Jesus the King for when he got me the job. And I can say praise Jesus for the King when I can't see the miracles. I can say praise Jesus the King for the moments in the wilderness, for the moments in the desert. I can say praise Jesus for the King in the moments of doubt and uncertainty. I can say praise Jesus the King for when I'm still waiting for the miracle. And so what I want us to do, I want us to spend some time reflecting, because I think this passage challenges us. It challenges us to acknowledge and worship Jesus. It challenges us to worship Jesus when we have seen the miracles, and it challenges us to worship Jesus when we're still waiting for the miracle. To choose into that, not because we feel like it, but because we know it to be true. And so I'm going to invite us into a time of reflection. So on the back of your chairs, you have 2 Post-it notes. Now we know. You've got 2 Post-it notes, 2 different colors. And we're going to pass out some, if you don't have pens, we're going to pass out some pens, some writing utensils. And on the pink Post-it note, I want you to write down your miracle. On the pink Post-it note, I want you to write down a way in which you have seen God work. Now, this is just for you. You don't have to write down a whole paragraph. It can be a one word. It can be a phrase. It can only have meaning for you. You don't have to put your name on it. In fact, don't put your name on it. That's fine. But on the pink Post-it note, I want you to write down your miracle. I want you to write down one way in which you have seen God work in your life. It can be yesterday. It can be 2 weeks ago. It can be 30 years ago. And then on the blue Post-it note, I want you to write down the miracle you're still waiting for. I want you to write down for the thing that you're still asking God for, that you haven't got yet, the thing that you're waiting for. So the pink one, the miracle, the blue one, the one that you're waiting for. I'll give us a few minutes to do that. So I just invite you to continue to do that. Michael's going to be playing some worship as we do that. And if you're done and when you feel ready, I invite you to take the Post-it note and stick it up on the cross. And I invite us to do this as an act of worship. It's not a wishing well. It's not magic. It's not a formula for getting what we want. It's just a way for us to acknowledge, not just in our heart, but with our actions, that Jesus is king over our lives. In the areas where we've seen him work, and in the areas where we're still waiting. So as Michael leads us in worship, I invite you, when you're ready, come take your Post-it notes and stick them up on the cross.
I see the King of Glory coming on the clouds with fire. The whole earth shakes, the whole earth shakes. I see His love and mercy washing over all our sin. The people sing, the people sing. And Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. And Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. I see a generation rising up to take their place with selfless faith, selfless faith. And I see a new revival stirring as we pray and see. We're on our knees Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest.
As he rode along, the crowd spread out their garments on the road ahead of him. When he had reached the place where the road started down the Mount of Olives, all his followers began to shout and sing as they walked along, praising God for all the wonderful miracles they had seen. Blessings on the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in highest heaven. To transition us into our time of communion, and I think it's so appropriate given what we have just done. Because at communion, what Jesus is telling his disciples, what he's telling his closest friends is, my body is about to be broken, and it's going to look like a loss. It's going to look like the end of hope. It's going to look like the end of everything. But rather than being a loss, my broken body is going to be the means for your hope. It's going to be the means for your salvation. My broken body will bring life and light to the world. And if he could do that with his own death, then he can do that with all of this as well. For those places that still feel like a loss, for those places that still feel hopeless, Jesus says, I can bring light. I can bring life. Where there is death, I bring the resurrection. And so we think about that, we meditate on that, we think about those areas where we're still waiting for the light and life of Christ, and we come in and enter into communion. And we remember that on the last night that Jesus was with his disciples, he took the Passover meal and he took the bread and he broke it and he passed it around to his friends and said, this is my body broken for you. Take and eat. And then he took the cup and passed it around and said, this blood is my blood shed for you. Take and drink. It will look like a loss, but it will be the thing that saves you. So I just invite you, as they did then, we do now,